So we are now, don't say anything more embarrassing than you want to be recorded and stored for old time on YouTube. And we are streaming. Okay, so we won't start for 2 more minutes, but we are visible. We're like the panelists at the front of the room. We can, people can see and hear us.
Fair. I've got my great pumpkin coffee mug, so
Yeah, I was just admiring that.
Yes, Marshall's find. It's the best.
And we have people coming in, so that's awesome.
Let's see. I never know whether it's like, better to have like a fancy background, or if it's like better to just, show people like sort of, where the magic happens. So
I did consider, tidying my office really well, setting up the really impressive looking books, and then taking a photo of it, and then just use that as my background, and then I could put everything back the way it was.
Maybe that's a good one. Depends on how ugly the magic is.
Yeah, I do have a I'm not doing this because video. We've asked people not to do video, but I have versions of this where I film my office, and where every now and then I will walk in and be juggling or playing the flute or doing walk back out again, and people are like, "What?" So anyway, it is 3:30, so I think we can go ahead and get started. Welcome to Computers, AI, and Deserved Paranoia. Just some housekeeping things. If you want to ask questions, you can do so in the chat, but we may miss them. You'd be better off to hit the Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom screen. I will keep an eye on the Twitch chat as well, but again, I wouldn't guarantee that. So your best bet is the Q&A feature. And with that, I'd like to ask the panelists to introduce themselves and explain why they're here, or at least why they think they're here. Let's start with Lauren.
Hi, I'm Lauren Tafoe, and I'm coming to you from Albuquerque, New Mexico. I am a science fiction and fantasy writer. My first novel, Implanted, came out in 2018 from Angry Robot, and it's cyberpunk meets solarpunk, spy-fi meets cli-fi, adventure and romance. And I think it's because of this book, which has a very tech-forward kind of thing. My background's in mass communications, and I did a lot of research on data collection and internet access and how that kind of populates down into people's behaviors. So I think that's why I'm here. So I will pass it on.
Okay, Andrew?
I'm Andrew Burt. I was the founder of a first ISP out there called NICS. I was a computer science professor at the University of Denver for a few decades, specializing in things like AI, networking, computer security, operating systems. Those are kind of my wheelhouse. I've written a bunch of science fiction, and these days I spend a lot of time republishing other science fiction under Reanimus Press. We have about 400 books out from a bunch of Cephwa grandmasters and others, and there is an AI tie-in there as well, as I've developed a lot of AI systems to help fix up the OCR errors, the scanning errors in old books. So there's little AI everywhere.
That's cool.
Jim?
Hi, I'm Jim Henderson. I'm coming to you from Colorado Springs, science fiction author. See if I can point correctly. My currently published books are up here. They're all part of a series called the Mantis Saga. A small ship and its crew running around having adventures is the basic theme of that. And I did finish the first draft of the next novel of that just yesterday morning. So I've started the painful editing process, and we'll see where that goes. I am a a computer science person by trade. Started out as a programmer, done a bunch of other IT things, and the last decade or so has been focused on cybersecurity, some of the privacy stuff, as well as all the various other security controls. And my books have a lot of AI and robots in them, and that's another interest point.
Amy?
Well, I'm Amy Armstrong, and I actually am coming to you from Aurora, Colorado, which sounds so much less like glamorous than Denver, Colorado. I just moved to Aurora. So, and I don't know. I mean, I am not 100% sure why I'm here. I think they had to put me on another, panel so that I was, earning my my keep. But normally I do a lot of like I helped co-host the BarCon when we had like a in-person BarCon back in the day. And, I read a lot of science fiction. I, interact with a lot of people in the community. I do write my own stuff, although it tends to be more like horror or women's fiction kinds of things. And sometimes there is some overlap with science fiction. So yeah, but this should be interesting. I mean, I am a therapist in real life too. So, I mean, there definitely is a lot of concern and interest out there in terms of how data collection affects people's privacy, and also like, how it's often used to manipulate people. So, I do have some thoughts on that. So.
Great. So you can talk us down. That will be helpful.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So I was going to introduce myself as being entirely computer generated and then get you to see if you could prove I wasn't. But I'm also in Colorado Springs, where it is starting to snow seriously in earnest. I'm a software geek. I bite the head off of software, I guess. I was co-founder and CTO of Sharewell Software down here in the Springs. I also write large computer books, which are really useful for keeping doors open, and I have some published short fiction in various genres. So I'd actually like to break this conversation into two, and I'd like to talk about them. So we'll start with one area and then move into the other later. Between what we have as AI today and what's coming soon versus the concept of general AIs, the HALs that are doing things for us later. So let's start by talking about just where we live today. There's a few different things that are going on with AI, and I'd actually kind of like to turn to those of you who are actually more experienced with the AI side of things and talk about how you feel AI exists today and what it does versus the perception of what it does. So I'd actually like to start with Andrew, since you're...
Well, I guess it depends what you mean by AI. My background has been in AI. My dissertation was in AI. I applied at the time AI principles to algebraic symbolic computing systems. And my view of AI is it's just a fancy buzzword, to tell you the truth. I think it's sort of a shorthand way of saying complex software that does some stuff for you. In a certain sense, AI could be any program. I mean, if you wrote a program that converts millimeters to inches, a two-line program, you could say it's, in a sense, it's artificially intelligent. You feed in inches and it spits out millimeters. Wow. I think normally they do a little more complicated things than that, or like they like to think they do more complicated things. But to me, AI is kind of any software, really, especially the more complex software that crunches a lot of data and tries to do useful things, or maybe useful to somebody things which may not be what you want it to do. If it's out there building a profile of you so it can sell you widgets on Facebook, maybe that's not such a great thing. But so the promise of AI has always been creating something that thinks like a human, I think is the end, the grail of AI. But what could go wrong with that?
Yeah, it does seem like we talk about future stuff about, oh, wouldn't it be cool if you could just talk to your phone and it will do stuff for you, and that's like science fiction-y, and then it can do it. It's like, oh yeah, that's just computer stuff. But does anyone else have an opinion on what perception versus reality today?
Well, I think you made a good point that the differentiation between general AI, which is okay, one day these days down the road, truly kind of more of a truly human-like intelligence, and what we have today, narrow AI or specific AI, that can be very human-like in doing a very specific thing because that's what it's trained to do. So those are some pretty important differentiations. Another point about AI that I think's useful to remember, it's always been it's one of those things of, oh, it's just around the corner, just 10 years, 20 years, whatever. But along the way, the definition has kept changing, or the interpretation of what it is has changed. I think certainly if you had asked any of the some of the early pioneers, back at MIT in the 60s or whatnot, okay, say I had this little device in my house. It just sat there, and then I could talk to it in English. It would listen to what I say, and more often than not, it would do what I wanted to do. It would tell me information. It would give me the weather. Would that be AI? I think back then, pretty much everyone there would say, yeah, that's certainly AI. That's pretty impressive. Now we're here, that is certainly narrow AI in pieces, but now we're like, that's not really AI. Real AI is down the road and around the corner. But again, that interpretation or definition changes over time.
Yeah, now if that device could like float up out of the house and start, then maybe it would be, oh, wait a minute, sorry, I guess they do that now. That's just uber creepy to me. I'm sorry, but.
So are you thinking about the drones, or like?
There's a new version of the Amazon device that will actually lift up as a drone in your house and float around your house, so it can scan things and take pictures, and if you're not there, yeah.
No, thank you. No.
Yeah. So you say that. So let's actually talk about those devices, not just as far as the AI-ness of them, but the paranoia-ness of them. As the techies know, those devices don't actually have the capability as yet to process what you say and do something with it. What they do have the technology to do is take what you say, stream it to a server somewhere that may have the ability to do it, or may stream it to a human being who might have the ability to do it, then record it pretty much until the end of time, and then play the piece of music that you want. And of course, it has to be listening continuously to say if you actually said, hey, wake up and answer this question. So is this okay? Are we okay with that? Are we getting okay with that? Is there some situation where we just forget about it? And what are the ramifications? I know I have lots and lots of thoughts on it, but I'd like to hear from you guys. Maybe start with Amy.
Well, I mean, I think there's sort of the difference between like wanting to say you're okay with something and actually being okay with it. Because, I mean, for the sake of convenience, I think almost all of us are okay with it to a certain extent. I mean, I have my smartphone with me almost all the time. I use it as a alarm, and it has Siri on it. And I mean, like, just like Alexa, I mean, she's always listening. I mean, she's kind of like a romantic partner in the sense that, she listens to what she wants to listen to. But nevertheless, I mean, that's there. And I mean, like, the idea is pretty creepy, at least I mean, there's certainly a lot of activities and things that are said in the bedroom and wherever I am that, I'd rather someone wasn't hearing it. And I think that the other thing is that, I mean, this actually has come up in the therapy world as well about, where information's going. I mean, for one thing, you've got smart devices that are listening to everything, and yet, everything you're talking about is supposed to be confidential. And then, there is the issue of, like, what potentially ends up going to a server and where that server is, who else has access to that server, what else is on that server, how long is it saved? And then is there a human involved, and, who's that? And, and I realize that there are commands and stuff involved, but it's like, it's kind of icky. I don't know. That's my take.
Lauren?
Could I ask a question real quick, Amy? Because I've been seeing articles too about the rise of like domestic violence being perpetrated through these monitoring, through the Internet of Things and things like that.
Yeah, there are lots of ways to stalk people now too. That's another thing. Which, I mean, can be great inspiration for stories, but I mean, it's also like, I mean, part of the reason it's scary is it's very real. I mean, I think I actually was reading some article, and, I only read the best things. I think this was Cosmopolitan or something, where they were talking about, like, spying begins at home. And it was really disturbing. Like, it was a very high percentage. I think it was like over 50% of people admitted that they had installed some kind of spyware or something on their partner's device, one of their partner's devices, without their knowledge, to monitor, who they were calling, who they were texting, who they were emailing. And also then there's, like, the GPS thing, I mean, you can tell, like, where somebody is, where they're going, where they've been. And I don't know, I mean, I think we're kind of normalizing that in a way too, that with a lot of these apps that are designed for parents to monitor their kids' devices. I think it's like Bark and stuff like that. And I'm like, I think that kind of sends a dangerous message that, this person that loves you, it's an expression of love. It's an expression of concern to be spying on your phone. And yeah. So that's,
if you love someone, chain them to the bedpost, and if they gnaw their foot off to get away, they didn't really love you.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think a lot of what AI fears and topics of discussion turn into is really data privacy issues. And, there's the whole singularity and AI running amok issue as well, but the data privacy and just being able to gather huge amounts of information and then process it and do something with it. That's, I think, the big issue is privacy and who's doing what with information about you. And not just now, not just what they already know, but what will they do in the future? We don't know 10 years from now what all that Facebook information is going to turn into. Google has Usenet News posts of, I made back in the 1982. And it's insane to think that stuff is still out there 40 years later. And, what's going to go 40 years from now? Things you say today, this Zoom session is probably going to be out there forever. And every little tidbit of data about us. I don't think we can even imagine the consequences of all these things yet. We see a little bit, but I don't think we have any clue, where it's going to go with everything about us being known to, in essence, anybody else.
Yeah, I mean, I think the scale of what can happen now, where for all intents and purposes, every bit of digital data can and therefore is stored, with the argument that at some point it will be monetized and or used against you. And the technology is such that you can do a lot of processing and you can make decisions about people, about things. you know, it's one thing when you target an individual. I mean, that's bad. But when you sort of globally sort of sweep things in and change laws, and suddenly things that were perfectly legitimate are now not, or, you know, think about what the norms were in the 80s as far as, you know, entertainment, or, you know, what jokes were allowed, and, you know, follows you for the rest of your life.
Yeah, and you can't know what's going to be taboo in the future. Like, we can look to see, you know, how good have humans been in the past at using information or information they might have had. And, you know, think what Soviet Russia would have done with this level of information about every citizen. Think about what Germany in the 30s would have done with this level of information about every citizen.
And I think we know what they're doing with our information now.
Right.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, I think, you know, the measure today is, are you still free to do it an hour from now? But 10 years from now, will you be free to still do it an hour from then?
Yes, something that actually I think worries me a great deal, tying off to something that Amy was saying, is that the normalization of always being listened to, there are two ways of reacting to that. One is to say, you know what, I'm just going to do whatever I'm going to do, and that's the way it is. I think for a lot of people, it's, well, I better not search for that. I better not say that out loud, and that's actually more insidious, because you're censoring yourself in order to prevent the devices from making decisions about you. I mean, this is really bad for writers, because, you know, at any given time, I was working on this story the other day. I had a thing on exorcism and poisons up on my screen. You know, I was like, I don't know what watch list that puts me on, but.
I think about it constantly. I was sending an email to someone, my doctor as it was, and some medical records that I had. And I thought, you know, I better encrypt this, because the email address was Gmail. And that means that if I send them a PDF of some old medical records, Gmail, free Gmail is, you know, going to scan that and know that forever. So I encrypted it and separately transmitted the key to the doctor, so Gmail can't scan it. That doesn't mean she won't.
Your doctor won't.
Yeah, it still may get out there. It still may get out there.
One thing, Cory Doctorow, I happened to, because of this, I've exchanged some emails with him. His reply has a warning: this message and any messages you send are being recorded, just to make it absolutely clear that everything you said. He worded it much more elegantly than I just did.
One other thought would be, you know, there is, of course, a reasonable concern that, you know, these things are listening and recording everything. You know, where is it being stored? Who has access to it? How long is it going to be stored? Our privacy laws aren't as sophisticated as some other countries, arguably. Or I think it's really provably in many ways. But on the flip side, or kind of the counterpoint to that, in our society, a large percentage of people have gotten used to sharing every aspect of their life. Here's what I'm eating for dinner. Here's where I'm at. Here's who I'm with. Here's, you know, what kind of relationship I'm in, and sharing it as broadly as possible. And they're frankly offended if people don't look at it and don't comment on it. So it's a huge.
I think they also get offended when you do look at it.
At this, you know, at the same time, you know, some level of concern about the sharing. And then, as Andrew kind of alluded to, there's the privacy aspect, which is maybe the bigger near-term problem. I think where AI comes into play. I mean, certainly AI does stuff now in narrow senses with that data, but in a lot of cases, all that data that's collected, it's, you know, it's important to keep in mind there is just so friggin' much data that it would be humanly impossible for anyone, any nation state or anyone else, to really go through that data and, you know, look at, let's read everyone's email for the day. You know, there's not enough people, enough money to hire enough people to do that. But as we get, we get better and better AI to do that, all of a sudden it becomes a possibility. Maybe they can look in every email every person sent, or the the transcript of everyone's phone calls or whatever, and do something with it. And that becomes a whole nother level of troubling, I guess you could say. And we have kind of maybe a kind of almost a counterexample maybe of that today. We've very recently seen, the news stories about, the filtering or censorship or fact checking, whatever you want to call it, with some of these social media platforms. In that case, they've got people involved, but I'm sure there's also some AI involved flagging things, what to look at, keywords to look for, and so forth. And, that's another mechanism, but it's, another case where we have consciously set up organizations to try to filter what can be said in that forum. And that's done in that forum.
Done it, but yeah.
It's done in that forum, but we don't see that yet in other forums. But we were watching something the other night, and there's a million political commercials come on, and our thought was, okay, why is there fact checking of whatever degree, however good or bad it is? Why is there fact checking on Facebook, but not on this TV show? Because no one's fact checking those TV commercials. That's for darn sure, right?
Yeah,
anyway, it's just another thing of like, where does that take us in our society?
Yeah. Lauren?
I just piggyback off of something else that Jim said earlier, and it was about we are conditioned to kind of put so much of our personal life online in terms of our selfies and our food consumptions and things like that. And I think this is something that's uniquely cultural in terms of we have been taught to kind of consumerize everything in terms of our daily life, and breaking it down into oh, I went to this place and I bought this, or even to what I ate, this special brand of whatever. And that ties into also just getting the next iPhone, getting the next software platform, the next social media platform, and we're leaving this digital trail of detritus behind us that is going to be used against us or people like us in the future. And so it's this whole sense of consumerism tied to the convenience that Amy was talking about at the very beginning, because not everyone's going to take the steps that Andrew did to hide his attachments in Gmail. There's that friction and that opportunity cost with every click of a button. Not everybody's as tech savvy to do that. We have huge technological illiteracy in this country in terms of both just ability to use these devices versus even having access to even use them in the first place. So that those inequities combined with the monetization and everything, it just makes this huge mess. Yeah. I would love to see it fixed. I just don't know how we can unless we start to decouple some of these things.
Yeah, and I'll say, by the way, Cory Doctorow's latest book, Attack Surface, it's from a tech perspective, it's very realistic about what's going on, and it makes it very clear that it doesn't matter how tech savvy you are, there's not a whole lot you can do if you're targeted. I do want to move on to another topic, and actually Tim Simpson asked a question that sort of leads really well into this. I want to talk about the reliance on algorithms that we now have in terms of monitoring Facebook or YouTube for copyright, for bad language, for inappropriate speech, but also for things like sentencing decisions or policing decisions. And if anyone wants to talk about that in general. No, okay.
I think it's a good idea, but I think that you need to have human oversight involved in that. Algorithms can do fine at kind of picking out things you might be interested in. They'll miss some things you want to see, and they'll give you a lot of things you don't want to see. So if it's sentencing guidelines or whatever, you have to eventually send it to a human if you really want to get good results out of it. At least at this point. I think we're approaching in some areas where we can do better. I've got a Tesla, and on self-driving, 99% of the time it does good. 1% of the time it scares the hell out of me and how it drives. So that's any of these algorithms.
Yeah,
do that
but
same thing.
keep in mind that the technology may not be there, but it is being used today. So,
Yes.
for example, hey, the police used to go to a lot of black neighborhoods or and arrest people. So therefore, the algorithm looks at the data and says, "Oh, look, this is where we go to arrest people." So that's where it sends the police cars. Ditto for sentencing, where it actually comes up with sentencing guidelines that is very, very racist, but a lot of places are using it anyway. And it is becoming more and more common where people just say, oh, the computers will do it. And there's no transparency into how those algorithms work for two reasons. One, because the companies claim they're proprietary, so you're not allowed to look. And two, because as you are aware, most of the time with machine learning, we don't have a clue why the algorithm is making the decisions that it is making.
That was my PhD dissertation, was
Yeah.
trying to explain algorithmic behavior in a teaching way.
Yeah.
It's very difficult. It's probably even impossible.
I do remember the one of the early AI experiments where the army was trying to train an AI to identify tanks in photos, to say, are there tanks here and are there not tanks here? And they trained it with the set of photos and it worked beautifully. And then they ran another set of photos through it and it didn't work because they did the training on a sunny day and they did the other data set on a cloudy day. And what they had done is built a system that could identify the weather. And that problem is hidden because all of these systems are so complex. They're much, much more sophisticated now in some respects. But I personally am really worried about how often we are putting things in the hands of computers that should not be. Lauren?
I just want to touch back on the police scanner thing. I think too, the other side of this is they invest so much into these new systems that are supposed to make things easy, and that they can't then divorce themselves away from it because they've already allocated the resources. It was such a significant chunk of their budget that they can't just say, oh, it doesn't work anymore, because they have to then be accountable for that outlay of purchase. And that sucks.
Yeah.
The war on terror is one of those great examples where we were attacked. Our attackers probably used phones at some point or the internet. Therefore, we will hoover up. And if you look at Snowden and all that, we will hoover up every phone conversation. Well, just the metadata, who was talking to whom, when, and what. Like, you couldn't actually figure out anything other than everything from that. Every email, every piece of data, without taking into account that you're trying to dip into a data set where there are very, very few terrorists. So you have a massive false positive issue where you either have you find so many people who, well, this could be a terrorist and this could be a terrorist. So the FBI is running around following up ridiculous leads. It's different than Netflix suggesting a movie because lots of people watch movies. The first time I saw an algorithm that predicted, they had a room full of people and they asked everyone to write their top 10 movies down. And people would tell me the 3 of the movies on your list. And it would put up a list of 20. And in almost every single case, their other top movies would be on the list. And it was just amazing. But it's because it's a completely different type of problem. We're applying AI there. It's a beautiful solution. When you're applying it to something like terrorism or policing, it's less so, in my opinion.
But
go
ahead.
I was just going to say that one thing there is, it's one thing where you have an algorithm that a group of programmers sat down and constructed themselves and thought through the requirements from the customer and whatever, and wrote the software to hopefully do that. But then as you get to where you're using more and more AI and the machine learning, where it is deriving the rules, it is making up the algorithm basically itself. Then you have to have a mechanism for testing that, not just testing that it works, but having a way of figuring out, okay, what is it what is it doing here? Is it talking about neighborhoods? Is it talking about socioeconomics? Is it doing what we expect it to do? Or is it doing some strange things that we never wanted it to do? A way of checking for, kind of what it's doing, making sure it doesn't have any weird biases that we don't want it to have, and just understanding it. So there has to be a way of us being able to understand what the computer made up itself.
There is a bunch of research going on right now to have some of these neural net based approach and machine learning in general. Neural nets is but machine learning in general, algorithms deliberately document how they are thinking. But the problem is that invariably, right now that's a much simpler. They can only do that at a much simpler level than some of the more complicated ones that we're dealing with. And Andrew probably has a much more insight into that than I do. But
it's very difficult. It's really hard to explain what an algorithm is doing in any useful way. Is what it really comes down to. And to address what Jim was saying, I think you also need to, and Arlen was saying, you need to look at the motives. When they were hoovering up, every phone call record, and then saying we're going to use AI to search for terrorists, there's probably other motives that weren't expressed, like we want to hoover up everybody's data so we can see who's talking to who and have this nice data set for other purposes that we're never mentioning to anybody. And down the road, bad things may happen or good things may happen.
That's the rule of surveillance. We are only doing this for terrorists. Well, and drug dealers and people who haven't paid their parking fines, and people
who vote a certain way.
Yeah, I mean, it always expands. It never goes the other way. I mean, I'll tell you, just for this convention, the conversation came up. Well, are we going to record the panels? Well, of course we are. Well, we never do when it's a live con, but the technology exists. Therefore, we will record the panels. I mean, there was no, is it the right thing? And I'm fine. I mean, I think it's great that more people will be able to see it and so forth. But it was fascinating to me to watch that. We have a technological capability. Therefore, we will and must use it. And that's obviously a silly example, but I found it fascinating.
Well, and I mean, this is like a somewhat naive understanding of it, but it's just algorithms have gotten so sophisticated, and not just for collecting data about people and behavior, but they're also being used in computer models to simulate spread of disease and also like possible efficacy of vaccines. And so it's like you've got all these algorithms that, the thing is, like, for something like that to work, I mean, there's got to be an allowance for like learning and, variability. And then, when I take a look at something like I don't know, another therapist asked me to watch The Social Dilemma. And, I watched that and I was like, okay, some of this feels like, I mean, there's definitely a slant in that documentary that, it's like Facebook is just bad and it's, just commercializing all of our behavior. It's kind of like that. What a lot of the things that we're saying about Facebook is like stuff that, that one comedian was saying about, high school, about basically, just turning us into little consumers. He's the one that said bobbing man ass. I can't remember his name. Bill Hicks said that. Yeah. So, sorry for putting that other image in your head. But anyway, but like, I mean, supposedly some of the people who were involved in creating the algorithms and creating the structure of Facebook and how, it kind of learns like what kinds of things get your attention and what you're likely to respond to, makes it kind of manipulative and addictive. And so, yeah.
I mean, if you think about how, I'll use YouTube instead of Facebook. Facebook is just prima facie evil, whereas YouTube actually has value. So sorry, that was out loud, wasn't it?
They're all evil.
sorry, but with YouTube, for example, it is a great example of positive feedback, and positive feedback is not a good thing. It would be like your thermostat in your house saying, "Hey, it's getting warm. We should turn on the furnace." So you watch a video, and YouTube looks at it and says, "Oh, well, they like this video. Let's find videos that are more like this." But they keep having to up the antes to more and more extreme. So what happens with YouTube is, if I had a cat video, but now if you're not, shooting your cat out of a cannon, no one's going to watch it anymore because it's not exciting enough. And pretty soon there are going to be terrorist cats. I'm exaggerating, obviously, but well, I mean, most cats are borderline terrorists anyway. So what happens is, over time, and they've shown this, and they've done tests, you start watching a little bit of, hey, there's slightly craziness with, I don't like this politician, and suddenly you're hip deep in QAnon, and all of the videos you see are QAnon related. So you're not seeing the ones that aren't related to that, because obviously this is what you want to watch. So we're just going to get more and more and more into that little bubble. And Facebook does the same thing. It wasn't evil intent on the part of YouTube or their programmers, or on the part of Facebook and their programmers, but probably. Sorry, something came out with Facebook recently where they showed that to avoid bias, they deliberately inserted bias. So they were accused of bias against conservatives because they were blocking a certain portion of videos. But they were blocking them because of content. Well, they had to find a set of liberal videos to block that weren't they weren't making up the same level of stuff. So they arbitrarily picked, well, we'll block Mother Jones, and we'll block this site and that site, just arbitrarily. So I'm a little more annoyed with Facebook this week than normally, because that just came out. But yeah, so again, it's not intent usually. It's the algorithm. It's the same reason why you have sinks that don't work if your skin isn't white, because all the programmers were white and it worked great in their testing. I'm getting head up. I don't mean it to be that way. It's just this stuff irritates me as a programmer.
Well, I think if you look at the motive behind Facebook and Google, YouTube, it's making money for certain people, whoever that may be. Yeah. So Facebook is doing it because they want to make money. So there is it depends how you call capitalism. Is that evil inherently, or what level, or is greed when it becomes excessive capitalism, unchecked? I think that's where Facebook and Google basically are headed. Is unchecked greed. Yeah. And so that may be bad. That may be evil.
Yeah, I'm all for making money. I'd make a lot of money building software and running companies. I think scale has a lot to do with it, especially when you get to the scale where only companies of a certain size can compete. For example, Europe just passed rules for copyright protection, where you are required to monitor and kick out things that are a certain level. Well, YouTube has spent hundreds of millions of dollars building a system to do that. So, Bob's video sharing site is not going to be able to compete. So this regulation is actually really in favor of these major players. So I think it's an antitrust issue. I think you get to the point where someone is so big and so powerful that they destroy all of the competition, then they don't have to worry about whether their algorithms are fair or not, so long as they bring in more money.
I also wanted to mention, Australia has come down with legislation where Google and some of these search engines must pay the news outlets for the content that they use in their
the links
displays. And so I feel like if we did that here, we would have a much more vibrant journalistic integrity and community, because we wouldn't be putting them all, the journalism industry is just dying right now, especially at the local level, because all of that revenue is going to Facebook, it's going to Google, instead of them paying the privilege to display that content.
So part of the problem with the way those laws are written, and I'm all for journalism, but is that you're paying to link to things, and you're paying for, you can't even do a fair use quote of something without paying for it. So suddenly you're in, sorry, I don't mean to argue with everyone. It seems to be my day for that, but you've got a situation where, hey, I saw this news article, you should go read it. It's about such and such. I can't do that anymore because I have to pay you to do that. And the way the rules are written are very, very broad. So I do think, you know, long ago, we all used to believe that the way journalism was going to work on the internet was by micropayments. And maybe there's an answer to that. I just think that these broad stroke, and we're off topic, I apologize, but these broad stroke rules are a little concerning, even though I agree with the sentiment of what you're trying to do. I just think that the solution is too draconian in this case.
I think the broad stroke rules are actually very much related to the AI topic, because that's what AI is. It gives you some, you know, broad algorithm analysis of something that may be way off. You know, it may not be applicable. So the same thing.
So I'm going to talk about, we're running a little bit close to time, but another topic that is pretty big right now are deepfakes. We can create fake people to create thousands of fake accounts, but we can also make you say whatever we want to make you say. I just saw a demo not long ago where from 10 seconds of you speaking, it can simulate your voice, saying whatever it wants to say. And I can put your face on someone else's, well, let me rephrase. Someone who knows what they're doing can put your face. I could, yeah, it's still to the point where the automatic tools need a little bit, are not as friendly, but that's going to change. So we already have the issue with fake news and fake quotes. What happens to society when you literally cannot trust anything you see or hear?
So I think with the deep fakes, it's going to push us further along into having to be even more of a transparent society where you have to have the original video that is being manipulated available. You have to have your, you know, your calendar or your itinerary of that day available for those time periods where you're supposed to be going up to the hotel to see a prostitute or whatever the gotcha is, you know. So that's putting the person who's in that position, they have to then, you know, litigate their life essentially. And so that's pushing us more to that transparent society that I think somebody in the chat had asked about, because I don't see how you go back from that once this Pandora's box is opened. I don't know what the other people think.
No, we can't go back. It's like an asteroid hurtling toward Earth. You may recognize it, but you can't do much about it. We're in that situation already. The box is open. All our data are out there. Pretty much everything about us is out there. You can maybe limit it a little bit, but it's just, you know, getting worse all the time, day by day. So it's more, can you navigate? Can you survive? Can you avoid getting sick, as it were? It's kind of like an illness or you know, breaking a limb. It's can you avoid a bad incident regarding your data being out there as you go through life? And it may just be random bad luck.
Yeah, well, the benefit of deep fakes is, you know, they're very easy to do. They're just going to get better. Arlen, you joked that you thought about doing a video and, you know, basically saying you were completely computer generated. That is very soon in the future where you could be computer generated, and you know, it wouldn't be obvious. You know, especially when if you have a Zoom with, you know, 100 people, it'd be far less obvious, for instance. But then as Lauren mentioned, you know, then you get to this point of where if it is very easy to fake you, whoever you is, then if anyone chooses to do that, whether it's like, you know, whatever, a political thing, or it's, you know, maybe maybe in a custody battle, or just someone who dislikes you at work or whatever, then you wind up having creating yet another layer of kind of our litigious society where you basically have to constantly defend yourselves, bringing in lawyers is necessary because it is so easy for someone to, basically pretend you've done or said anything they want to say or pretend.
The flip side of that is if it becomes too rampant, then when you do something really bad and you have been documented, you just say, that was a fake. That wasn't me. I didn't shoot someone on Fifth Avenue. That wasn't me.
Yeah. And we're already seeing an arms race with algorithms determining whether something is a deepfake or not. Apparently right now, it's the better the fake, the easier it is to tell algorithmically that it's a fake. But that's going to change, and it's going to be like spam, where we're going to continuously be fighting for that. So let me ask some of the questions that we've been seeing on here. So we already asked about unintended bias in AI. Someone was, this kind of goes through what we're saying is, all of the college kids who did porn for textbook money and now are running for Senate. Are we going to, is that going to destroy them because of all of those videos being found, but are deepfakes going to make it so they can get away with it? So that's actually to your point. Someone's asking, what's the panel's opinion on chaff, where you create multiple accounts and try and fool AI by using them in different ways and different times?
It's very difficult. It's time consuming unless you've got something that does it for you automatedly. And create a bunch of fake yous with an algorithm. And
just as a writer with a pen name, it's a pain in the ass.
Well, and already it is standard behavior right now to test college essays against databases of existing essays to see if you've plagiarized.
For plagiarism, yeah.
And looking for stylistic, did you actually write this? It's really hard to be someone else. And the algorithms will catch you. I mean, they could make lots and lots of mistakes. You only get to make one before the systems will realize that you're the same person once you're linked in the back end. So interesting idea. I don't know if you can get away with it.
I actually did a project related to that to help find pirate versions of documents on the website on the internet. And it turns out that you can take just a few words, even 2 words, can uniquely identify documents that just simply won't exist anywhere. They might have a story by Hemingway, and there might be just a couple words in there, and you Google those 2 words together, and they may appear nowhere else but in that Hemingway story. So it's actually it's easier than you think to get a signature for something. But then if suppose you happen to string those 2 words together in a post, someone may find it and say, "Oh, you plagiarized Hemingway," because the algorithm pinpointed that.
Yeah. And then prove that you didn't.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah.
So the other side of that is all the data that gets aggregated may be completely wrong. If you have a very unique name, then data that's out there about your name probably gets attributed back to you. There's a lot of Andrew Burts in the world. I'm trying to find an author who wrote an AI book in the 70s called The Adolescence of P1. And I'd like to find the author. I know a little about him, but his name is Thomas J. Ryan. You know how many Thomas J. Ryans there are out in the world?
Yeah.
Even if he was born in 1942 in Canada and lived in California, I still haven't been able to find him. But there's a lot of data that points and says these people are the same person. There's other sites that'll attribute books to him because of the name, and he didn't write them. Because I found the authors of those, and they said, no, I'm not the guy who wrote the other book.
Yeah. Interestingly, there aren't many Arlen Feldmans, but there is one. There's a hydrology engineer in Texas who also is an author. And it used to be in Amazon. It would be my book, his book, my book, his book, his book. I've slowly pushed him down now. So I feel guilty about it, but yes. And by the way, someone just said there are more John Smiths. That's actually not true. I did an analysis of names for a project once. There are lots of Johns and lots of Smiths. Very few John Smiths, presumably because who wants to be John Smith? Anyway, another question. What do you think about the possibility that AI will make humans lazy, affecting our critical thinking skills and discernment? Would we stop thinking for ourselves? And have we already done that? and I can't speak for everyone on the panel, but for myself, definitely.
I would tend to think it's in a lot of ways it's too late. It can certainly make us lazier, especially as we get to where with AI and robots, and they can do a lot of things for us that that we currently do. But it has already certainly impacted the critical thought of a lot of people, if not all of us, to some degree.
I think that argument's been going on since the do we need to teach long division if people have calculators?
Mhm.
Yeah, I was going to use that exact example.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that we can't find a good way to test what the AI is doing at all times, the fact that we can't always read the code that it's based on, that lack of transparency, this black box of tech, I think that's going to be a problem. And that's going to keep us from really understanding what's going on at a fundamental level.
Yeah, maybe we'll start learning new skills, which are all about. So my argument always with long division or even with addition is, you don't need to necessarily be able to do exact math in your head. You need to know if the calculator is giving you an answer that is reasonable. And I think the same thing is true when the black box says X. You need to be able to have enough critical thinking skills to come back and say, yeah, X doesn't really make sense. I don't think I should, to solve my headache, I shouldn't go and bury my head in the sand. That literally,
Well, I think we should definitely be teaching more critical thinking, but I think there are also groups out there that don't want critical thinking being taught. Certainly, if you wanted an army of people who didn't think but followed you blindly, you wouldn't want critical thinking to be taught.
Yeah.
Imagine that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely true. And I mean, talk about I mean, back to what Arlen said about, Facebook being, blatantly evil. I mean,
sorry.
I remember,
inappropriate.
Yeah, a few months ago, in particular, I had to do quite a purge on my Facebook account because, it's like a lot of people decided to, think that being hateful in the name of self-righteousness was okay. And they were all saying the same talking points, exactly the same talking points. And I think you all probably are familiar with what I'm talking about, but and then when I pointed this out to one of them who normally is a very intelligent person, she got all butthurt and just was like, "You're making fun of me." And I said, "No, I just think you should know better, I think you need to get off this platform for a while."
Yeah. So very quickly, Michael Kingsley recommended the 2018 documentary, Do You Trust This Computer? And if you can put the link to that in the chat, I'd appreciate it. And transitional question for big data business, the most, I'm sorry, this is a really long, complicated question, which might mean we can't do it. Yeah, basically, are we going to accidentally slip our way into general AI from all of these little specialist AIs, which I don't think is likely, but you may end up with it.
I think what's more likely what we'll do is we'll slip our way into weird AI. Just because AI is meant to act like a human and think like a human and process like a human, doesn't mean that we won't come up with algorithms that suddenly are truly alien, probably as alien as anything we could imagine, coming from the stars. I think we could easily come up with things that are just completely, utterly alien acting, and we, the doomsday scenario. We better hope they don't have any way to hurt us. And as times go on, they will get that ability more and more. The Bernard Vinge's technological singularity is, maybe coming in the 2030s, 2040s when we're screwed. I don't know.
Yeah, if you ever watch videos of machine learning algorithms told to solve problems, like get this ball into the hole, and it won't cheat per se. It will just come up with, oh, take off my leg and use that as a ramp, and things that you would never have thought of.
Wow.
we are really out of time, so if we can just do last thoughts, and I do really appreciate you guys. I'm sorry I talked more than I intended to. It's been a really long day, and so normally I'd be a little more quiet than I was, so I apologize for that. But starting with Lauren.
Just be always thinking about what you're giving up for the convenience. I think we don't examine that enough. And trust in our institutions is at a low right now. And there's been so many data breaches at every bank, every store that you know of. Buyer beware.
Andrew?
Well, I chose this background, which is the inside of HAL 9000 from 2001. I think it's deliberate. Well, it's deliberate because I think it kind of exemplifies the whole theme of this, which is what could go wrong. What could go wrong with AI? But I think the cat's out of the bag. Really, I think nothing we can do to put it back in. We'll just have to hope things turn out well. My own thesis, which I put up in a novel that I need to get out there, is that we have a path between two things. One, AI getting rampant and weird and bad way, or humans merge with the machine, and so that we retain our humanity by becoming the machine. And I think that's really going to be humanity's only hope, is that we become the machine. So I'll end it with that.
Thanks. Jim?
Well, I guess one to the point of the AI, I tend to be more optimistic, I guess, than many people in terms of that AI will evolve, or will go forward and so forth, and does not inevitably result in the Matrix or the destruction of the world. I think that our own self-interest in constraining as we build it will limit that. Not an impossibility, but I'm more optimistic than most. And then just to add to Lauren's comment, every business you can think of has been hacked. In cybersecurity, we gotta say there's two kinds of businesses: those that have been hacked and those that have been hacked and don't know.
Yeah, nice. And Amy, you get to talk us down. So last word to you.
Oh, well,
make it better.
I mean, I think that a lot of people are apprehensive of technology, but just because it is this black box. And I mean, there definitely is some stuff to be anxious about, but I think that a lot of it is that, it's how humans use the technology, and it's how we use the information, and it's how we, ultimately consume it. And so, I mean, I think that people do have, a lot more power than they think they do. And, it's just, yes, absolutely, buyer beware, and just, check yourself, and, step away from it sometimes, and, actually get in touch with, okay, what is concrete reality and what's just all this gobbledygook. So.
Well, thank you all very much. I think this has been an interesting discussion, and I think this is the last. No, actually, I'm wrong. There's one other panel still running, and then there's the Orchids and Onions panel going on to discuss what went right and wrong with the convention. So almost, but not quite done. But thank you guys. Really appreciate it. And I'm gonna sign us all off. So thanks.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Really enjoyed it.
Bye-bye.